Johnny Carson was famous as the man with the coldest head below in America. He could make seasoned politicians feel awkward and arrogant, stars feel timid. But the history of The Tonight Show recorded 9 special exceptions. However, history has proven that even the most solid fortress can be shaken by the beauty and intelligence of women. They did not need to resort to offensive or revealing tricks. Their weapons were much more subtle and lethal, speaking eyes, suggestive touches of the hand, and sharp answers that made Johnny's face turn bright red. From the bold humor of Dolly Parton and the bluntness of Angie Dickinson to the deadly innocence of Suzanne Somers, all created explosive chemistry. In their presence, Johnny Carson was no longer the sharp-witted host. He became a confused, embarrassed man, having to constantly wipe sweat from his forehead or look away. Let us turn back time to witness again the 9 flirty ladies of the highest class in television history, where the art of feminine seduction made the legend Johnny Carson surrender unconditionally. Dolly Parton, trading a year's salary for a peek. In the final years of the 70s, when color television had become an indispensable spiritual dish for every American family's dinner, Johnny Carson's The Tonight Show was the cathedral pose of entertainment. The audience loved Johnny for his elegance, wit, and ability to master every situation with an invulnerable, cold head. He was the most powerful man of the late night, who could make politicians break into a sweat and movie stars feel timid. However, on one fateful night, that cold head completely melted before a golden whirlwind named Dolly Parton. The atmosphere in the NBC studio in Burbank that day seemed to heat up by a few degrees from the moment the orchestra began playing upbeat country notes. When Johnny called her name, the velvet curtain opened, and Dolly stepped out like a miniature radiant sun. She was tiny, only exactly 5 feet tall, but her presence filled the entire large room. Her golden hair was elaborately puffed, soaring high as if challenging gravity. Her bright red lips always wore a radiant smile, and her rhinestone-studded outfit hugged every curve of her body. Dolly did not walk. She glided on precarious high heels with a confidence that made people hold their breath, every eye in the studio, from the most seasoned cameraman to the audience in the back row, was tightly pulled toward her like a magnet attracting iron. As Dolly approached Johnny's desk, she brought not only a pungent perfume but also a fertile energy full of life. She was not timid or shy like a newly entered actress. She sat down in the guest chair, adjusted the hem of her clothes, and immediately occupied the space. Johnny Carson, in his perfectly tailored suit, seemed eclipsed for a moment before that radiance. He looked at her, his eyes sparkling with a mix of delight and a rare hint of confusion. The contrast between them was interesting, a sharp city gentleman and a country girl, as she admitted herself, but one who was deadly smart and charming. The conversation began not with tedious social questions, but with Dolly's crisp laughter. She knew clearly where the audience was looking. She did not hide or pretend to be modest about her oversized appearance. On the contrary, she turned it into a weapon. Dolly leaned forward, shortening the safety distance between her and Johnny. That action was both natural and full of calculation. It forced Johnny to look at her at close range. And that was when Dolly's artistic flirting took effect. She did not need to touch him. Just her playful eyes and the way she lightly tossed a lock of golden hair were enough to make the king of television clear his throat to regain his composure. The climax of that evening came from an impromptu moment that has gone down in history. Dolly was talking endlessly about her fashion style, about how she liked things that were sparkly and tight. She talked innocently about her famous bust, asserting it was the real thing amidst a Hollywood full of fakes. Johnny Carson, the man famous for standard rules on television, suddenly became a mischievous schoolboy. He stared intently at Dolly's outfit, his gaze stopping where everyone knew it would be, then looked up at her with a face that was both serious and humorous, in a moment of inspiration, forgetting the script. Johnny blurted out a sentence that was later repeated forever. I have certain principles on this show, but I would give about a year's pay to peek under there." The whole studio seemed to explode. The audience gasped in surprise and then burst into laughter and a round of crisp applause. It was a bold joke, an open flirtation heavily colored by masculinity, but placed in a context so humorous that no one felt it was offensive. That sentence hung in the air, both sparking curiosity and serving as the most expensive compliment for Dolly's charm. If it were another woman, perhaps they would have turned bright red or shown anger at being excessively teased. But Dolly Parton was not an ordinary woman. She did not flinch. She leaned back, laughing heartily, her laughter echoing throughout the studio. She received that joke as a compliment for her effort in image building. She looked at Johnny with a mischievous eye, as if wanting to say, "I know exactly what you guys are thinking, and I like it." Dolly's reaction turned a situation that could have become rude into a supreme response of grace. She was not a victim of the scrutinizing gaze. She was the master of the game. She knew she was beautiful. She knew she was sexy. And she allowed Johnny, as well as millions of male viewers, to be permitted to admire that within the framework of fun. Angie Dickinson, the shocking admission. If the studio of The Tonight Show was once compared to a gentleman's club, where Johnny Carson held supreme power, then Angie Dickinson's appearance was the moment a woman stepped in and gently stripped that power away, only with a suggestive smile, not noisy like rock stars, nor needing elaborate, gaudy outfits to attract attention. Angie stepped onto the stage with the demeanor of a woman who had thoroughly understood the art of seduction. She brought a completely different atmosphere, maturity, richness, and a bit of sweet danger of a grown woman who knows clearly what she wants and knows how to make the man opposite her desire it. As Angie stepped through the velvet curtain, the whole auditorium seemed to pause for a beat. She possessed the legs dubbed the most beautiful in Hollywood legs once insured for $1 million, and she knew how to subtly show them off through graceful, confident steps on high heels. But Angie's sharpest weapon was not her legs, but her eyes. From the very moment of meeting Johnny Carson, she did not look at the audience or the camera. She looked straight into his eyes. It was a look of intimacy, an implicit connection that made people speculate about the real relationship between the two outside the stage lights. There were rumors they had once dated, and tonight, that rumor seemed clearly visible through the explosive chemistry between two equals. Johnny Carson stood up to greet her, and the handshake between them lasted a bit longer than the usual social level. He guided her to her seat, his gestures attentive and mixed with unconcealed admiration. When Angie was settled, she crossed her legs elegantly, the slit of her skirt just enough to provoke curiosity, but still maintaining absolute elegance. She tilted her head, her wavy blonde hair falling loosely on her shoulders, and wore a smirk. Not a people-pleasing grin, but the smile of a woman holding the initiative in the conversation. Johnny, who was famous for his cold head, suddenly became unusually awkward. He toyed with the pencil in his hand, cleared his throat several times before beginning the question, as if he were facing an old lover rather than a guest. The conversation between them took place like a dramatic face-up card game. They talked about ordinary topics, but the tone and eyes contained thousands of different layers of meaning. Angie did not dodge Johnny's tough questions. She received them and returned them with sharp, intelligent answers. She knew Johnny liked women with intellect, and she used that very intelligence to flirt with him every time Johnny gave a compliment. Angie did not blush timidly. She looked deep into his eyes, leaning slightly forward, narrowing the physical distance between the two chairs, making the surrounding space seem to contain only the two of them. The audience in the studio became eavesdroppers on a romantic date full of electric sparks. The most valuable moment, the second that engraved Angie Dickinson's name into the history of television seduction, came from a seemingly harmless question about fashion. Johnny Carson, with a fake naive face, asked her about women's dressing habits. "Tell me, Angie, after all, do you women dress up grandly for other women to see, or is it for us men to see?" It was a trap question. If she answered it was for women, it would sound haughty. If she answered, it was for men. It would sound submissive. But Angie Dickinson did not choose either of those answers. She paused for a beat, her eyes lighting up with a spark of mischief. She smiled, a mysterious and provocative smile, and then slowly replied with a deep, sexy voice, "I dress for women, Johnny, but I undress for men." That answer dropped into the studio like a bomb. Johnny Carson was stunned in a split second. He was completely defeated. No script could have prepared him for such bold and graceful frankness. He tapped his pencil hard on the desk, a familiar action whenever he was extremely excited, and leaned back in his chair, laughing loudly, his face flushing with delight. The audience applauded wildly, whistling in appreciation for Angie's wonderful wit. She had spoken a naked truth about seduction, but in the most elegant way possible, not at all vulgar, not at all offensive, simply the confidence of a woman who knows clearly where her gender power lies. Carol Wayne, the breath that paralyzed the studio. When the stage lights shifted from the warm yellow of the interview area to the somewhat gaudy and cheap tones of a mock movie set, the audience knew it was time for Tea Time Movie. Johnny Carson, shedding his usual elegance, donned a coarse plaid suit jacket, attached a fake mustache, and transformed into Art Fern, the slick host specialized in advertising useless goods. But Art Fern, no matter how talkative, was only a supporting character providing the background for the appearance of a real wonder. From behind the shaking backdrop, Carol Wayne stepped out, and immediately, the whole studio was hypnotized by a bright light of innocent to the point of sinful charm. Carol Wayne did not play a sharp movie star or a powerful queen. She played the matinee lady, the lady of the afternoon movie screenings. She appeared in glamorous evening gowns, hugging every curve of her body, an image completely out of place compared to the shabby context of the skit. But that very disconnect created a strange attraction, with bouncy platinum hair, wide-eyed, bewildered eyes, and a smile as sweet as cotton candy. Carol walked gently as if gliding on clouds, approaching Johnny Carson, who stood dazed with a ruler in his hand. The most valuable moment, the second that millions of male viewers waited for every night, took place according to a familiar but never boring script. Carol stopped right next to Johnny. She did not say anything yet. Instead, she performed her famous move. Carol took a very deep breath. That movement took place slowly, making her chest expand fully, pushing the woman's charm to the peak, as if she were gathering the entire atmosphere of the studio into her lungs. Johnny Carson, in the role of Art Fern, immediately froze. He stared wide-eyed, the ruler in his hand trembling, beads of sweat beginning to break out on his forehead. Was his confusion real? Or was it acting? Perhaps it was both. After that deadly breath, Carol then spoke, not a husky, provocative voice, but a high-pitched, whispering and wheedling voice like a little girl. "Hi, Art." Just those two simple words. But through Carol Wayne's delivery, it became a heavy weapon. The contrast between the fiery appearance of a sex bomb and the innocent of all crimes voice created a booming comedic effect. She looked at Art Fern with blinking eyes, completely unaware that her presence was causing chaos in the mind of the person opposite her. She played the role of a dumb blonde who did not understand distant insinuations, someone who merely stood there to beautify the frame. But that very not knowing anything was the peak of the art of flirting. It allowed men to be permitted to gaze, to be permitted to imagine without feeling guilty, because she was too sweet and harmless. Johnny Carson, a master of nonverbal reactions, often had to pretend to look away, or hold a handkerchief to wipe the sweat from his forehead, or even look straight into the camera lens with a resigned face as if wanting to say, "Do you see what I have to endure?" The interaction between them was a dance of humorous temptation. Carol kept being innocent, and Johnny kept being confused. She did not need to touch him, did not need to say honeyed words. Just the fertile presence and that wheedling greeting were enough to turn Art Fern from a fast-talking salesman into a stutterer who could not form words. In those skits, Carol Wayne proved that seduction does not necessarily have to come from sharpness or mystery. It can come from softness, from the most primal femininity. She was the living doll of The Tonight Show, a character created to tease the audience's imagination. But through Carol's acting, that character became more lovely than vulgar. She was flirty in an innocent way, making people both want to laugh and want to protect her. And every time the music ending, the skit played. The image of Carol Wayne standing giggling next to an unconditionally surrendering Johnny Carson remained forever one of the most classic symbols of the humorous seduction of 70s television. Zsa Zsa Gabor, the ruthless philosophy about husbands. If there was one woman in this world who could turn marriage and divorce into a supreme performance art, it could only be Zsa Zsa Gabor when the stage door opened. The first thing the audience saw was not a person, but dazzlingly bright sparkles. Zsa Zsa stepped out like a true Hungarian queen, wearing the most glamorous outfits, luxurious fur shawls, and most importantly, diamonds. Diamonds everywhere on her neck, on her ears, and packed densely on her slender fingers. She did not just come to chat, she came to remind the world of the definition of frivolous luxury. Johnny Carson stood up, adjusting his tie with a familiar half-smile. He knew he was about to face a storm, not a natural storm, but a storm of wheedling and money-scented woad love philosophies that were strangely graceful. Zsa Zsa did not shake Johnny's hand like others. She offered her hand covered in rings, palm down, a gesture deeply characteristic of European aristocracy, implicitly wanting a kiss on the back of the hand or at least a gesture of cherished respect. And Johnny, like every other gallant gentleman, was always ready to play the servant before this beauty queen. Once seated, Zsa Zsa immediately occupied the space with her pungent perfume and unmistakable characteristic Hungarian accent. She did not call Johnny by his name. To her, every man, including the American king of television, was just darling. The way she elongated the final sound of that word was as sweet as honey, yet had something somewhat condescending, as if she were talking to a good little boy. "Darling, do you see my new ring?" Zsa Zsa asked, offering her sparkling hand in front of Johnny, forcing him to hold it and admire it. She was not afraid to brag. She considered it as natural as breathing. The dialogue between them always revolved around the eternal theme, men and property. Johnny Carson, with his wit, often teased her about her long list of ex-husbands. But Zsa Zsa never appeared embarrassed or sulky. She was a master of turning criticism into praise for herself. She leaned toward Johnny, placing her hand on his arm, a calculated, invasive gesture, but very soft, and began lecturing on her philosophy of life. She was flirty, not to seduce men into bed, but to seduce them into opening their wallets. And strangely enough, men were delighted by that ruthless frankness. The peak of that gold-digging grace was when Johnny asked a suggestive question about her skills as a wife after so many breakdowns. The audience held its breath waiting for a glossed-over or defensive answer. But no. Zsa Zsa Gabor blinked her carefully made-up eyes, smiled mischievously, and uttered the sentence that has become legendary. "I am a marvelous housekeeper. Johnny, every time I leave a man, I keep his house." The entire studio seemed to explode. Laughter and applause resounded incessantly. Johnny Carson laughed heartily, leaning all the way back in his chair. He was completely defeated. It was sharp intelligence wrapped in a frivolous exterior. The famous punning sentence stripped bare her pragmatic nature. But through that witty and confident way of speaking, it became extremely lovely. She did not hide her ambition. She turned it into a joke and invited the whole world to laugh with her. Zsa Zsa Gabor on Johnny Carson's hot seat was evidence that seduction does not necessarily have to come from virtue or gentleness. She was flirty. She loved material things. She changed husbands like changing clothes. But she did all those things with a style so luxurious and humorous that no one could hate her. Johnny looked at her with an eye both admiring and amused, as if looking at a precious piece of jewelry, but one so expensive that no one dared to own it for long. That night, Zsa Zsa was not just an actress, she was a phenomenon. A woman who taught Hollywood that if you are beautiful enough and smart enough, you can say anything you want, including admitting you love a man's house more than the man himself. Raquel Welch, Johnny's out-of-control confession. In the 70s, Raquel Welch was not just an actress, she was an eighth wonder of Hollywood. She possessed a healthy, wild, and fiery beauty, completely breaking the standard of the previous fragile dolls. When Johnny Carson introduced her name, the audience at the NBC studio did not just applaud. They craned their necks to see clearly. They knew that an earthquake was about to pass through their television screens, and Raquel did not disappoint anyone when she stepped out, bringing a heat that melted the entire cool atmosphere of the studio. Raquel appeared in an outfit designed as if to challenge the heart rate of men, a short, tight-fitting dress, daringly deep cut, highlighting her honey-brown skin and the curves that had become iconic. She did not walk with a feminine, delicate grace. She strode with confidence, strength, and pride. As she approached Johnny's desk, he stood up to greet her, but one could clearly see a rare awkwardness on the face of the king of television. Johnny adjusted his tie unconsciously, his gaze wavering, trying to find a safe point to look at so as not to be considered rude. But it seemed every point on Raquel was unsafe. The moment Raquel sat down was a masterpiece of body language art. She slowly crossed her endlessly long legs, smoothed her bouncy brown hair, and directed a sharp gaze toward Johnny. She knew clearly he was confused, instead of helping him regain his composure. Raquel decided to tease. She leaned forward, resting her chin on her hand, narrowing the distance between the two. Her smile was not a social one. It was the smile of a woman who knew she was in control of the game. The interview began with a struggle. Johnny Carson, famous for his superhuman memory and flexible improvisation, suddenly became stuttering. He asked questions, but when Raquel answered, his gaze became vacant. Where was he looking? Perhaps he himself did not know, only knowing that the radiant beauty in front of him was paralyzing the information processing ability of his brain. Raquel was talking about her new movie, about serious acting, but she realized her partner was losing signal. Raquel stopped in the middle of a sentence. She was not angry, but on the contrary, she felt it was interesting. She slightly changed her sitting posture, adjusted her collar a bit, a small action, but one that made Johnny jump and look away, pretending to look at the audience. Raquel burst into laughter, a crisp laugh full of innuendo. She asked directly, her tone a bit teasing but still full of sweetness. "Johnny, did you hear a single word I just said?" The question hit the nail on the head, making Johnny Carson turn bright red. The whole studio cheered with delight. Raquel Welch had done what few people could do, turned Johnny Carson from a sharp host into an embarrassed schoolboy. She did not need to bring snakes or gimmicks. Just by her sitting there, breathing and smiling, the flirtatiousness emanating from her confident aura and peak beauty was enough to knock down all defenses. Bette Midler, the king's rare tear. In the final days of May 1992, the atmosphere at the Burbank studio no longer had the usual boiling excitement, but instead a lingering, beautiful, and solemn sadness of parting. Johnny Carson, the American king of television, the man who had lulled millions of viewers to sleep every night for 30 years, was preparing to leave the throne. In those final moments, the person chosen to sing the farewell song was not a young, fiery starlet, but Bette Midler, the divine Miss M, that night. Bette did not come just to be a guest. She came to perform the most moving and profound seduction in the show's history. A flirtation with the soul that made the coldest man shed tears. Bette Midler appeared not with shocking, revealing outfits, but with the richness of a soulmate. Right from sitting down in the guest chair, she erased all social distance. She leaned all the way toward Johnny, her bright eyes looking at him without blinking, a look both mischievous and affectionate, containing a whole sky of memories. Bette's flirtatiousness tonight did not lie in physical caresses, but in the suffocating intimacy in the space. She spoke to him in a whispering voice. Her witty jokes from every day now sounded like the intimate words of old lovers reminiscing about the past. She made Johnny laugh, but that smile was distorted with emotion. The climax of this artistic flirtation was when the studio lights went out, leaving only a single spotlight shining on Bette. She began singing the song, "One for My Baby," a sad ballad about lonely people in a bar at the end of the night. Bette did not stand still on a distant performance platform. She sang, and her eyes locked onto Johnny Carson. She ignored the millions of viewers watching television, ignored the band behind her. In that moment, the world had only two people. She sang every word as if pouring honey into his ear, like a woman pleading with the man of her life to linger a bit longer before dawn. Johnny Carson, who had spent his life keeping a steady face before every storm, completely broke down before this sweet attack. He sat still, his hands lightly tapping the rhythm on the table. And then rare tears began to roll down his cheeks. He did not try to hide it. Bette Midler had used her voice and soulful eyes to pierce the armor of the king of television, touching his softest and loneliest heart. That was seduction at the highest level, no need to touch the body, but embracing the soul of the person opposite. When the final note resounded, Bette opened her arms wide, and Johnny stepped forward and hugged her tightly, a very tight hug, full of regret and respect. There was no vulgarity here, only the sublimation of emotion. Bette Midler proved that a truly attractive woman is one who can make a man both desire and respect her, and want to cry on her shoulder. That night, she appropriated Johnny Carson's heart openly and spectacularly, leaving television history with a romantic and tragic ending that is impossible to forget. Shelley Winters, The Touches That Caused Panic. If there was one woman who made Johnny Carson the calmest man in American television truly fear for his safety every time she appeared, it was Shelley Winters. Unlike the sweet flirtatiousness of Dolly Parton or the innocent seduction of Suzanne Somers, Shelley Winters brought to the studio a Category 12 storm of unpredictability and a fiery personality. She was the embodiment of a direct romantic attack, where the boundary between guest and host was blurred by the graceful boldness of a screen star who had experienced all kinds of joy, anger, love, and sorrow. When Shelley stepped out from the velvet curtain, she did not walk gently. She swept in like a whirlwind, bringing glowing energy and a radiant but dangerous smile. She did not wait for Johnny to reach out his hand to shake. She actively took his hand, squeezed it, and sometimes even pulled him into a passionate hug that made Johnny lose his balance, right from the first moment. Shelley established new rules of the game tonight. She was the one in control. When both were settled, the drama truly began. Shelley did not sit still on the other side of the desk. She constantly leaned forward, invading Johnny's safety zone publicly. She reached out to adjust his tie for him, brushed an invisible dust speck off his shoulder, an action natural and possessive, like a wife taking care of her clumsy husband. But her eyes were completely different. They were sharp, playful, and contained bold teasing. "Johnny, why are you sitting so far away? Are you afraid I'll eat you?" Shelley spoke up, her characteristic husky voice echoing in the studio. That question made Johnny Carson jump in fear. He gave a half laugh, trying to push his chair back a little by natural reflex, his hand reaching up to scratch his nose, a classic sign indicating he was extremely confused. Shelley had hit his weak spot. She knew he was afraid of women who were too proactive, and she took pleasure in that. Not stopping there, Shelley began talking endlessly about her rich love life, the men she once loved, and then suddenly turned the car to attack Johnny. She stared into his eyes, smiling suggestively. "You know, Johnny, we could have been a perfect couple. I could teach you a few interesting things." The audience in the studio cheered with delight, applauding wildly for her boldness. Johnny Carson, his face turning as red as a ripe gack fruit, could only laugh loudly to hide his embarrassment. He was completely overshadowed. His sharp intellect and quick improvisational ability seemed to be neutralized before Shelley's relentless and fertile attack. She was not flirty to beg for attention. She was flirty because she liked it, and she knew she was attractive enough to do it. Shelley Winters on The Tonight Show's hot seat was vivid evidence that seduction has no age. Even though no longer a young starlet, she still made men break into a cold sweat because of her confidence and passion. She turned the interview into a humorous romantic chase, where poor Johnny Carson became the bewildered prey in the hands of a seasoned hunter. Goldie Hawn, the spectacular trick of innocence. If the studio of The Tonight Show once had to strain itself to catch the sexy storms from sharp ladies, then the appearance of Goldie Hawn was like a playful, naughty sunbeam slipping through a window slit, brightening the whole room but also dazzling people with an ungraspable radiance. In the late 60s and early 70s, Goldie did not walk out with the demeanor of a powerful star. She flowed onto the stage with skipping steps, her short blonde hair hugging her chubby face and her big, round blue eyes always wide open as if surprised by everything in the world. The audience applauded incessantly, but that was not applause for a distant sex symbol, but for the lovely girl next door. Goldie sat down in the chair, and immediately, her most potent weapon was activated laughter. It was not a social laugh, nor a calculated, flirty laugh. It was a giggling, crisp laugh that sounded like wind chimes ringing in the afternoon breeze. She laughed because she was nervous. She laughed because she saw Johnny staring at her. And she laughed just because she liked it. That very innocent of all crimes nature was the peak of the art of seduction that Goldie possessed. She did not need to try to appear sexy. She just needed to sit there, lightly biting her lower lip, her eyes blinking repeatedly when Johnny asked a somewhat tough question. "Oh, Johnny, what do you mean?" Goldie exclaimed, her high-pitched voice mixed with a bit of adorable panic. She tilted her head to one side, looking at him pleadingly, like a fawn lost in the old forest needing a hunter's protection. Johnny Carson, the man famous for his cold head and sharp jokes, suddenly became unusually soft. He did not have the heart to tease her too much. The male protective instinct rose strongly before that naivety. Johnny leaned forward, lowering his voice more gently, re-explaining the question like a patient teacher. And when Goldie finally understood, she clapped her hands, burst into laughter, and carelessly slapped Johnny's shoulder very hard. That touch was completely non-sexual. It was like two close friends. But that very extreme naturalness removed all barriers, making the distance between them disappear. There were moments when Goldie forgot what she was saying in the middle of it. She stopped, frowned, reached up and lightly ruffled her messy blonde hair. That absent-mindedness in others might be considered unprofessional. But in Goldie, it became a deadly hidden charm. She made men feel smarter, stronger, and desire to be by her side to prompt her. Johnny Carson looked at her, shook his head with a half-laugh, the face of a man completely defeated by this lovely mess. He realized that Goldie Hawn's seduction did not lie in her body curves, but in the positive energy and the naivety to the point of making the person opposite want to melt to join in that joy. That night, there were no flowery flirtations, only Goldie's giggles and Johnny's gentle gaze, creating a sweet wordless love song of American television. Suzanne Somers, The Helpless Silence. Before a love poem. When the movie Three's Company was taking the television airwaves by storm, Suzanne Somers was not just an actress, she was the American dream, with radiant blonde hair and a sun-drenched smile. When Johnny Carson introduced her name, the NBC studio seemed to brighten up. Suzanne did not walk out with distant, haughty grace. She skipped, lightheartedly gliding through the velvet curtain like a schoolgirl lost in the world of adults, bringing a stream of joyful and carefree energy that made anyone seeing her have to smile. Suzanne brought the personality of the character Chrissy Snow intact to the hot seat innocent. Dumb in a lovely way, but possessing a deadly sexy appearance. She chose a soft silk dress, modest enough, but still skillfully highlighting the curves that had become iconic. But her heavyweight weapon was not her appearance, but her voice. When she leaned toward Johnny Carson and uttered a greeting, it was a famous, breathy voice, a mixture of a whisper and a sigh. Sweet as cotton candy, but capable of melting even the hardest hearts of stone. Johnny Carson, the powerful man who always kept a cold head, was truly jammed before this sweet attack. He looked at her, his hand unconsciously adjusting his tie, his eyes shining with an interesting confusion. Suzanne did not need to try to flirt. She just needed to sit there, blinking her wide, bewildered eyes and answering Johnny's questions with an innocence to the point of being sexy. She played the blonde role so excellently that Johnny had to several times pretend to wipe sweat from his forehead and look toward Doc Severinson's band with a resigned but fully interested face. The most classic moment took place when Suzanne decided to read a poem she composed herself to Johnny. Excerpted from her debut poetry collection, Touch Me, she pulled a small piece of paper from her bag, cleared her throat, and began to read. The content of the poem was very simple, talking about innocent romantic tremors, but through Suzanne's delivery, it became a manifesto of seduction. She emphasized every word, taking very deep breaths between the lines, turning schoolgirl verses into moist whispers by the pillow. When she ended the poem and smiled radiantly, waiting for a compliment, Johnny just silently nodded, wearing a suggestive half-smile. Suzanne burst into giggles, the crisp laughter breaking the tense atmosphere. She had won without Johnny having to speak the word of defeat. That night, Suzanne Somers proved that sometimes a man's confused silence is the loudest compliment for a woman's charm. Johnny Carson has said farewell to the stage, carrying away an entire golden era of television. Looking back at these 9 roses, we see not only beauty, but also the class of old-school seduction, subtle, intelligent, and full of grace. The great Johnny Carson was defined not only by his sharpness, but also by the way he was willing to take a step back, accepting a red face or confusion to honor the woman opposite him. Those are authentic and beautiful historical moments that perhaps today's television would find hard to recover. As for you, among the 9 beauties mentioned above, who is the person who impressed you the most? Don't forget to click like and share this video to share those beautiful memories with friends. And click subscribe to the channel right now so you don't miss the next interesting behind-the-scenes stories about old Hollywood.